Welcome back to the Woodgrafter. Today in the shop we're going to have a look at this. This is a precision triangle from benchdogs.co.uk. That sounds good? Stick around. Now this is one of the most requested products that benchdogs.co.uk has had. In fact, it only exists because customers have got in touch and saying, hey, we want a precision triangle to help us with layout work, markup work, etc. Are you going to produce something? And this is a response to the market request. So today we're going to have a look at this and put it through its paces and see what it does. Now, in full disclosure, this has been provided to me free of charge by Ralph over at benchdogs.co.uk. As always, I'm under no obligation to like this, to rate it, to endorse it. If I think it's pants, I can go ahead and tell you as such. So it should be interesting to see what this can actually do. Do you need one and do we really care? Let's have a look. So let's start off by looking at the triangle itself. This is what you're going to get in the kit. You're going to get the benchdogs.co.uk triangle. The triangle comes in round about 457 millimeters on the two lengths. On the long side, the slope is about 634-ish. It's got a number of markings on this. All those are laser etched, so they're not going to wear off on you. And it's got a couple of scales. It's got a scale down this length and a scale down this length, calibrated from 0 to 42 centimeters, 420 millimeters. It's got a micro scale here that we'll look at in a second that's called a narrow cut gauge. And it's got degrees marked across this length here. The entire thing is made out of aluminium. It's a reasonably nice weight and it's no flex in it at all, so it's nice and secure. And it's anodized in this nice black matte coat that Benchdogs are rolling out across most of their products. It's got a series of pre-drilled holes inside here. Now these are 20mm holes and they're set exactly at 96mm apart. If that sounds familiar and it sounds like an MFT grid system, you wouldn't be wrong, and there's a very, very good reason why they're there, and we'll look at those shortly. It's got a cutout here in the centre, both for lightness of the device while still retaining that rigidity, but also to give you some clamping points that we can look at shortly. It also comes with this device here. It's known as a foot or a cheek, and it also has these two knurled knobs for attaching this to the triangle, and we'll look at that in a second. And it comes with a couple of alignment pins. Now that kit there in that configuration, it's now July 2021, is going to cost you £145. Now at the moment this is on pre-order. The first batch came in, the sort of test batch as I like to call it, and this is one of those initial batches. They've sold out pretty quickly and the next batch comes in and is ready for dispatch at the end of July 2021. So that's your overall price. Now don't forget, if you are going to purchase one of these, use the code TheWoodgrafter at checkout and that's going to give you a 5% discount on the product. So what does this do for us? Well, let's look at it first of all in its simplest format. These two alignment pins will sit into any of these small holes around the edges here, and all those are threaded. It's a pretty toolless on this one. You don't need to tighten these things down. Just put those in there, fit them in like so, and what you now have working on your stock is the ability to quickly mark out both 90 degrees to your edge and 45 degrees to your edge as well. And that's pretty good for marking out. So that's a triangle in its simplest format and its simplest use. It allows you to quickly mark things out on your stock. 90 degrees, 45 degrees, no issue. Now those alignment pins, as I said, will fit on any of these holes, so you can adjust the position of these depending on what you want to achieve and the stock, and that's quite simple and easy to use. When you bring the foot in, it starts to bring in a little bit more functionality. And what I want to do is to put the foot in so the end of the foot lines up with this edge here of the triangle. Now again, this is toolless change, so I'm not going to mess around with screwdrivers or Allen keys or anything like that. That just simply drops in like so. I'm going to put it on its edge so I know that the end of the foot is flush with the triangle. Now that will come in and give me the same functionality where I've got my 90-degree reference edges and my 45-degree reference edges, so no big dramas there. But what it also does, it now creates for me a pivot point right down here in this corner. And as I start to pivot that, that's where these degrees come into play here. So if I take this as my reference line here, that's 0 degrees. If I now pivot this around, so this 5-degree point here lines up with the edge, that now gives me a 5-degree angle between those two lines. If I come in, keeping the pivot point in place, that's now a 10-degree, 15, 20. It's got a large mark here for 22.5, which is a common angle we want to cut, so that's good to see. 22.5, 30, and this is so super easy, 40, 45, etc. So you can start to see we can use this now as a protractor, and that's going to give me quite good control of my angles simply by using this pivot point here. Now the other thing that the foot gives you, it allows this to actually stand on its own 2 feet, or 1 foot in this case. So you can see that's now going to hold itself upright. And I know that this edge here is exactly 90 degrees to this surface here, the reference surface. Now that's going to allow me to quickly line up my tools in the shop. So imagine if this was against my bandsaw blade, or imagine if this was against my table saw blade, or imagine if this was against the fence on my planer jointer, I can quickly make sure things are at 90 degrees. Similarly, turning it round in this direction, I can now pivot the table on my bandsaw blade, and I can now make sure it's at 45 degrees, 45 degrees angle on my table saw, 45-degree angle on my planer jointer. So you can use that in a variety of different ways for calibrating your machines and setting your machines up. So we've now got a device that can quickly give me 45 90-degree angles. I can attach the foot and I can create a pivot point which gives me the concept of a protractor with a variety of different angles, or I can use it to set up and calibrate my machines. So straight away this is beginning to be a useful sort of device, I think. Now as you know, I'm a lover of the MFT, the multifunction table, to the point that when I designed my workbench I put a series of MFT tops inside here because I love the repeatability, the accuracy that gives me in my overall workflow. And this device has some really neat tricks up its sleeve when it comes to using it with an MFT. And remember that series of 20mm holes that we spoke about? They really come into their own. Let me show you. Now inside the kit you're also going to get a couple of 22mm dog, alignment dogs I think he calls them. And that means that you don't actually need this type of fence. This is the benchdogs.co.uk Mark II fence. You no longer need this type of fence on your bench to make accurate cuts. Now obviously one of the great things about an MFT table is it works incredibly well with a track saw rail. And as long as you're using a series of dogs to hold this in place, you know that the cutting edge is always going to be lined up with the holes inside the bench. So that's parallel to all of these holes, or 90 degrees to all these holes, depending how you look at it. Now in normal use, I will have a fence down the back here, but you may not want to have the fence, or you may not want to carry that fence with you for some reasons. Now this triangle could work really, really well for you. Now because it's got this 96mm series of holes, you can use supplied dogs, drop them in, and that triangle is now 90 degrees to this cutting edge. So you can come in with an appropriate piece of stock, line it up against the edge of your triangle, and when you come in with your track saw, you've now made a perfect 90-degree cut to that edge without the use of the overall fence. You can now come in and make a 45-degree cut. So that is really, really useful with the MFT. Now, like me, you've created your own MFT top. You may not have used 96mm spacings for this series of holes, but you can still use the same functionality. Drop in the dogs to any convenient holes and line up the 45-degree edge to that. Drop in any clamping sort of device, and lock that into place, and that now gives you that same reference edge that you can go ahead and you can cut your board to. So it really is pretty versatile inside its use. And if you had a number of dogs like so, you can line up your rail to those dogs, and now you've got the perfect 90-degree angle again to go ahead and make your cuts. Now, just to reiterate, in the kit you get these two dogs here. You don't get the surface clamp and this additional set of dogs that I've just used. But I do believe that if you do have the 96mm spacings, it's a lot easier just to use the pre-drilled holes on the triangle itself. Now, if you do have the fence, such as the Mark II fence that I tend to use, this has got another trick up its sleeve. Let's set up and look at that. Remember I said there's two gauges, there's 0 through to 42 centimeters, but there's this micro gauge, and it's known as the narrow cut guide, and it starts at 10 and comes down here 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 10mm increments through to about 185 here at this end. And there's actually two gauges. Here it says Festool and Makita narrow cut guide, and if you turn over the tool, on this side it says the Mefel and the Bosch narrow cut guide, and these are slightly different. This one starts at 9 and goes to 19, 29, 39, 49, etc., working in this direction. So this trick I'm going to show you now for narrow cuts works incredibly well with the Mefel rail, the Bosch rail, the Festool rail, or the Makita rails, and this is calibrated depending on the type of rail. Now, track saws work incredibly well if your stock is longer than the width of your track. But the minute you're cutting something that's narrower than this, you start to run into problems because you can't anchor it, you can't support it, it's hard to measure it, things tend to shift in you, you tend to get raggedy cuts. And that's what this sets out to solve. And it works in conjunction with a fence. If you put the triangle against the fence, you can now slide this under your rail. Once my triangle comes up to that cut line there, the 0 mark on side here lines up with the back edge of my rail. So straight away, I know where that cut's going to be. So if I want to make a 10mm cut, I simply take the 10mm and slide it back to the edge of my rail, which in this case will be about there, and the stock can come underneath the rail as always, and I've now got a very narrow 10mm cut. Let me show you what I mean. So I've just dropped my track in as normal, and I'm just going to slide up my mark till I get to a position of, I don't know, say 20mm, about there. I'm just going to lock that into place just by using any standard clamp. So on that small gauge that we saw on the back, that's now got 20mm flush to this end here. Now don't forget, I've got the triangle now parallel to this cutting edge here, 20mm back from the cutting edge. So I can now come in with my board, line it up against that triangle, and that's now given me a lot of support in that piece of stock. So when I come in with my saw and make that cut, that line is 20mm, and it's not bang on, but that's about 19.5mm on that line. But more importantly, that's parallel all the way down the cut. Now there is one challenge with this calibration gauge here, that it's got parallax error. Now if I move my head around trying to line that up, depending where my head is, I won't get that perfectly aligned, and to look straight down is quite hard because I'm stretching over the bench. So I would probably not use personally that gauge, and it is there, and if I wanted to make a cut that was near enough, then absolutely I'd bang that into 20mm, get it as close as I possibly could, and then I can go ahead and make a whole host of narrow repeatable cuts. What I'm more likely to do is to come in with a set square. I would set the 20mm on my set square so it's accurate, and then I would just come in with this calibrated to 20mm, slide up the square to there, then lock it into place, and then I can go ahead and make my repeatable cuts. But that solves a problem that I think a lot of track saw users would actually solve. And to be honest with you, that is the feature that I use the most on this triangle. Now there's two more things I want to show you on the triangle, and I want to go back to the foot and that setup. Now as a track saw user, I tend to use these Benchdogs here, and I've done reviews on those in previous videos, and the reason being is I want my cut line to sit in between the 20mm holes. Now the problem with Benchdogs is you can get a small amount of play in the track, and you can see that moving backwards and forwards. And typically what you will do is you'll come in with some sort of trusted square, you'd line that up against there, and you just make sure that your track was square to that fence, and then you'd lock it down. But I find that this narrow edge can slip in here. There's a small groove on side here, and if I go in this direction, I'm catching inside that groove. So it's not hard, but it is a bit fiddly. Bring your foot up, rest it against the fence, and that gives you a beautiful long reference area here, just to make sure that your track is square. Once it is, lock that into position, and that doesn't move then. I now know that the cutting line on my track is exactly 90 degrees to my fence. You can buy some optional extras with your triangle. You can buy another foot or cheek with the appropriate thumb screws and some more alignment pins if you should ever lose them. Obviously you can buy more 20mm dogs that are always useful to have around the shop. Anyway, now one final use of the triangle before we close. In the centre here you've got all these cutouts, and that's ideal for clamping. You can move the foot back so it's no longer on the pivot corner. Lock that down. Come in with a second foot and lock it on the opposing edge. And this now gives you the ability to come in as a clamping square. Using an appropriate quick clamp such as this Bessie one here, and you've now got a 90 square between your two panels. Quick and simple as that. So there you go, that's a precision triangle from benchdogs.co.uk. You can use it for quickly marking out those 90 and 45 degree angles. We can use it as a protractor to give us a whole range of different angles using that cheek and that pivot point. We can use it to set up the machinery inside our workshop. We can use it for making narrow crosscuts when we're using it in conjunction with the fence. We can use it without the fence to give us great functionality with the MFT and using appropriate track rails. And we can use it for 90 degree clamping corners with an appropriate clamp. So overall I think it's a good product, great addition to the workshop, and if you're after a precision triangle in your workshop and you're an MFT user, I think this becomes a no-brainer choice. £145 on pre-order now in July 2021, shipping at the end of July. And don't forget to use the code the Woodgrafter at checkout for 5% discounts on all of your benchdogs.co.uk purchases. Hope you found this useful. Look after yourself, stay safe, and I'll see you next time on the Woodgrafter.